Спасибо, коллеги. В таком случае, я думаю, что нам можно перейти к нашему следующему докладчику. И следующая у нас должна докладываться Мила Ан- Ангелова.
Ангелова.
Мила Ангелова. Здравствуйте.
Здравствуйте, здравствуйте, мне
Да.
очень приятно. Здравствуйте. Я буду по-английски, потому что мой русский не очень хороший, я не могу говорить, все понимаю, но не могу говорить так, чтобы я буду по-английскому.
Хорошо. Прошу.
Very nice to meet you from Sofia. My enormous pleasure to see you. Actually, I got invited by Yulia Zhukova and Liden and Dance because we are partners via an association for quality language services, which deals with quality in language education. And today what I'm going to talk about is how we switched to online teaching in March. Then we thought that we will be face-to-face, like the whole part of the teaching world. But nowadays, we again have to go back to online teaching or do hybrid teaching. So I'll share with you the lessons that we learned and the challenges that we had in this switch to online teaching, and what is the effect or what the effect will be on teaching languages from now on after this COVID-19 situation. So the aims of my talk, I'm going to talk you through the challenges that teachers face in transitioning to online teaching, because this is a very, how to put it, demanding situation. It was really a very, very stressful time for all of us when we had to go and teach from our homes. And the challenges are also about how to provide teachers with adequate and timely training to be effective when teaching online, how to guarantee that the teaching standards will be as high when we move to online teaching, what resources to use, and what techniques to involve, because we suddenly realized that everything that we've been training our teachers to do in the face-to-face classroom is not necessarily true for the online classroom. And of course, I'm going to share with you some practical tips about now what happens to teaching of languages, and not only languages, from now on after we've been through this crisis, because I want to be positive, and I'm convinced that we learned a lot of lessons which can make our teaching and the learning process even more effective, more engaging, by employing a mixture of different resources. So believe me, teaching will be never the same from now on. I'm convinced that this is the truth. In terms of training of teachers about how to teach online, even now, because you might be experiencing it even now and have people who are new to the business of teaching online, I think there are several challenges and several problems. One of them is access to relevant training content and resources, and who to do the training, and what kind of resources to use to teach teachers to deliver language teaching online. So my experience shows that we cannot actually refer, there are plenty of tutorials. For example, we are using Zoom here. I forgot to mention I'm based in AVO, Language and Examination Center in Sofia in Bulgaria, where Yulia came and did her CELTA course with us. So the first thing is access to training, and what kind of resources can we use in order to make sure that teachers can do a lot of training even on their own. And we started using Zoom, and it turned out that actually there are plenty of videos, online tutorials on the internet. So it makes sense that, for example, I can recommend Russell Stannard, who does excellent sessions for how to teach online via Zoom, how to perform the different functions, and how to make teaching effective. And for example, how to use the breakout rooms, how to use the whiteboard, how to monitor students, and all that. And it's done bit by bit. And it helps teachers, if they can watch it many times, and they can learn how to perform the different operations if they are not comfortable about this, or if they're not confident. The other great thing is, in terms of training, is the resources. Thank God, all that I'm talking about the English language teaching world, because we are not doing Russian, but for the English language teaching, all the publishers actually provided loads of resources, talking about Cambridge University Press, Oxford University Press, and they gave access even to their coursebook software, which can be shared on the screen and used in the online classes. So it makes sense that the different publishers are approached or just looked up on the internet, and all these resources are made use of. And of course, then comes measuring the effectiveness of the training. I think the most important thing for this training and for teachers how to teach online is to do it hands-on and just ask them to perform different operations, and then get them to peer assess or self-assess their performance, and of course then being observed by a senior teacher or the director of studies, so that you make sure that they're operating to standard. Because different people, depending on the age, depending on how technically savvy they are, they have, depending on their attitude to teaching online, their level of ability can vary at the beginning. And it's very important that everybody is, how to say, put at ease. They're not scared. They're psychologically ready to go online before actually we put them in the classroom and make them teach the students, because if the teacher is not confident, the students will not be confident as well. So this is essential. And then, of course, how to maintain high teaching standards, because it's not just about standing in front of the camera and delivering a lecture. We need to try and replicate the face-to-face classroom as much as we can in the online classroom. And believe me, this is absolutely possible even in Zoom, but it needs training. So what do I mean by high quality teaching standards in online environment? What we did, we just sat down and thought about what are good standards in the face-to-face classroom. For example, I'll give you a little example about, for example, for classroom management. For classroom management, you've got monitoring, you've got error correction, you've got giving feedback, and so on and so forth. The good news is actually that the same things apply to the online classroom. But on the other hand, you need to work it out, figure it out how to do it in the online classroom. Because, for example, error correction can be done by using the whiteboard in Zoom, or it can be used by sharing your screen and showing the software for the course book and showing, revealing the answers, and many, many various ways of doing that. So it's absolutely necessary to just compare the teaching standards for teaching face-to-face to the teaching standards online, and see how you do the same things but in another environment. And now that we had to go back from online to face-to-face, it makes sense that we do the other transfer. What was good in the online classroom, that we can bring back to the face-to-face and make a nice mixture, which helps us actually to become even more effective and more engaging for our students. And the other thing that is important about availability and accessibility of training resources, it is essential that you do not only train the teachers in sessions like this. It's important that you make the training resources available to them for future reference. I'll give you a small example. We use Moodle here as our repository for, I don't know if you're familiar with Moodle, it's a platform universities usually use. And we use Moodle as a repository for our academic resources, but also for students. And what we do, we recorded all the training sessions in Zoom, and then we made them available to teachers so that they can watch them again and again if they want to address a certain aspect they're not sure about, because they can, we had to train them in about 10 days in March to move online, and it's impossible to remember it all in such a short time. You need to readdress it, go back, try to remember. So it's essential that we try and make the resources available to them at all times and from everywhere, from their homes as well. For example, in a Google Drive or Moodle platform or whatever. So I won't actually talk a lot anymore about the challenges because it's another story, but I just want to share with you some lessons that we learned from this switch to teaching online compared to the face-to-face experience. So some do's, some piece of advice, words of wisdom from what we learned from the whole process. So I think we need to, when we have to, if you have to move to teaching online from now, you have to count on your institution's own experience in providing online teaching so far, and also your peers. I'll give you the existing resources, the course programs you already have, and just rethink and say, how can I move all that into the online environment so that I can use it purposefully? In our case, we had 3 or 4 teachers who already were doing online teaching, so we used them as the instructors to train everybody else. Uh, as I said, we used also all the resources we have online to use them in the classes, share them with the students, send them to the students, make them available. The other tip is when you start teaching online or hybrid teaching, don't start with the whole institution. Pilot in a smaller way. Start with the strongest teachers who are most confident about teaching online with, for example, classes, the groups which will be more responsive to going online first, or with one-to-one classes so that you don't, because if something goes wrong, this means a massive disaster for the whole institution. So it has to be piloting, it has to be done in a smaller way first. And what we did, for example, we piloted our first online lessons with, let's say, 15 teachers, and all other teachers were allowed to enter their Zoom rooms and peer observe them so that they feel at even more ease before going online themselves. The other important thing is that each teacher is invited to design their individualized professional development scheme. They need to tell you, I need to do many peer observations. I want to be observed by a senior teacher. I want to attend this or that training. I want to get feedback from my students about my online teaching, etc., etc. It is very, very individual appropriate, this kind of switch, because people, as I said, accept the change in a different manner, and we have to be very, very careful about the well-being of our staff and of our teachers, and don't push them just to go and teach online at any rate. For example, we had some teachers who are like elderly people. Some of them said, no, I can't do that. So we just didn't push them. Other teachers, it took them longer to get used to that. So it's the same. Also, I think you need to encourage research and self-study by the teachers, and then get them together to share experiences. The other thing that I mentioned was replicate the face-to-face context, what I was telling you about at the beginning, that we need to look at the criteria for a good classroom in face-to-face and just work it out and take the good stuff that's possible to transfer online in the online classroom. Now that we are in an online classroom does not mean that it should be a lecture type. Again, we need to encourage pair work, include all students, do monitoring in the breakout rooms, encourage communication, etc., etc. But as I said, the other way around is also important. Borrow features from the online classroom that can be nice in the face-to-face context. I'll talk about that later in my talk. Also, it's worth actually rethinking the type of education you're offering. For example, you might decide to increase the proportion of online self-study or online teaching and have a blended learning, because this will be more, so we used to be all face-to-face, but now it looks like people can do a lot of stuff on their own. For example, most of the books offer online tests and learner management systems with a lot of resources, so the homework is not anymore on paper. It goes online, it can be checked by the teacher, and then feedback can be given in the classroom. The other important thing is also to use books which give you a greater range of digital solutions. Again, I'm talking about the English language teaching. There are loads of books these days which do exam preparation for Cambridge exams with all the online assessment, language practice, video resources, audios, extensive reading, academic skills. So it's essential that we start looking in this direction. How can we use books which have some digital solutions? Because this will actually help our learners go out and learn outside the class as well as in our lessons. Also, it's important for you and for your teachers to acknowledge the skills and to praise people for the skills they've acquired from teaching online, because they definitely have become better teachers by adopting a new range of techniques. And also assess the benefits of the whole process, because as I said, every cloud has a silver lining. Actually, this whole crisis with the pandemic and the moving online so swiftly has a lot of potential for the future, for our professional development, but also for the nature of the businesses and of teaching, because we can expand the range of what we've been doing by including more online and distant teaching, and just get students from all parts of the country or the world. So I see a huge opportunity from a business point of view, if you want, for the educational business, because we can get even more, reach out to even more students than we used to do in the face-to-face context. And of course, some don'ts. I think your teachers and you as professors or managers or anything, we shouldn't be ashamed to ask for help professionally and even psychologically, because in the lockdown, a lot of people actually suffered from this isolation and felt depressed and didn't perform to the best of their ability. The other important lesson for us was that we shouldn't fear the change. Actually, we had to do it, but we learned so much for the last 6 or 7 months, and it gave us the chance to experiment with new approaches in teaching and involving the students in the process. And the other thing is, remember that the different age groups respond differently to online teaching. I'll give you a small example. We teach young learners, and it's one story to teach young learners online and a totally different story to teach adults online. For example, for giving feedback to a first grader, I can't always use the shared screen, or I can't monitor them in the breakout room, so they have to show me what they've written on their piece of paper, for example. So there's all these challenges, but all in all, I don't want to think that this was a negative experience. Now, let me focus briefly on the aspects of online teaching which can be beneficial to the face-to-face teaching, because one sooner or later, hopefully, we'll go back to face-to-face teaching again. I want to believe that, and I want it to happen as soon as possible, but it won't happen maybe before April, or I don't know when. So one thing that we can use from the online teaching in the face-to-face is borrow the online assessment. Why do tests in the classroom and waste class time? Instead of just doing online assessment, save time, check for the mistakes, and then come in the classroom and give feedback on that. For example, in our case, we actually adopted some of the assessment procedures from teaching online, and they saved us a lot of time. Students submitted their written work, teachers checked them, sent them back electronically via Moodle feedback, gave them more personalized feedback. The test components, as I said, were administered outside real class time, and we used interactive testing. And all this actually gives us extra class time to be used for communication or for other purposeful use in the classroom. Then, takeaway number 2. It turned out that actually the resources that we can borrow from the online teaching can generate even better learning and provide instant feedback. I mean, doing interactive activities which provide students with instant feedback. For example, as I said, most of the course books for teaching English, they've got these learner management systems in which students do the activity. Then the system gives them the score, shows them the mistakes, and then it has adaptive learning. It actually gives them extra materials, extra practice, extra exercises on the areas, the grammar points, for example, which they did wrong. So why not actually exploit that and use it as a resource in the face-to-face classroom as well. You can even do it as a whole class activity, use the projector, project some activities on the board and do it as a whole class, or do some competition, etc., etc. The other thing with the online resources, it turned out, there are a lot of visuals. Those visuals, especially for the younger learners, are always very appealing and very motivating. Our teachers, for example, started using a lot of games such as Kahoots, Quizlets, Moodle in class, students playing on their phones and having competitions, which can also very easily be transferred in the face-to-face classroom. But as I said, actually, this is also a good chance to extend the learning outside the class. You teach what you teach, but you don't want them to stop actually learning only in your classroom. You want them to go away and do something on their own. And it's very useful to use some of the digital resources outside the classroom. One of our teachers, for example, because she doesn't have enough time for doing speaking activities in the classroom, she gives them actually activities in which students have to pair them up via Skype, for example, communicate, record themselves, send the recording to the teacher, which teacher assesses. And what she does, she even doesn't write the feedback. She gives the feedback orally, recording it and sending it back to this particular student. This is very personalized. This is very, very much to the point, and it's very likely to generate better learning, if you agree with me. Another lesson learned or another takeaway from the online teaching is using online activities and resources for introducing innovation and flipping the face-to-face classroom. So using electronic activities, interactive activities, if you think about it, it even saves you paper. We don't actually do all the photocopying. We don't have to do all, the paperwork that we used to do in the face-to-face classroom. And what we can do actually is we can assign different digitized options for project work, student electronic portfolios in which they can collect all their work. You can assign, for example, students can write their own blog and contribute to it. And this is extra language practice, isn't it? So as I said, we teach them the language, the grammar, the vocabulary, the functions in our classroom, but we hardly ever have enough time for active use of the language and practice. And all these electronic options are here for us to give them a way to extend the learning and to continue practicing in a way which is more engaging, more interesting, and more appealing to the younger generations. Takeaway 4. Now let's talk about the teaching standards. So what can we borrow from the online teaching and these options to the face-to-face classroom, and why the online learning can be better in a way? So we can adopt doing one-to-one online tutorials with our weaker students, for example, even if we are in a face-to-face context, because each of us can set up their own Zoom account, and after the lessons or during the week, we can organize such online tutorials one-to-one with our students to help them and to provide them with further instruction and further guidelines about how to further improve. And this applies to any type of learner. The other thing that I mentioned is providing this individual work online with the adaptive learning platforms. What I mean here is what I mentioned to you, that those learner management systems, they give them activities which are specific to the mistakes they've made. And also we can encourage our students to start using all the online resources which publishers provided after the lockdown for self-study. There are loads of ebooks, blogs, and various resources which they can use for free and further expand and improve their language abilities. So this means that each student can be recommended by the teacher, the best of option for them to personalize their learning and to meet their individual needs and to cater for their individual mistakes. Extending learning outside the classroom is more or less like the previous point, actually choosing one of the options. We are always making them do something between the face-to-face classes and not just relying on what we do with them in the classroom. Another way of increasing the effectiveness of learning, actually, those digital resources can be much more appealing sometimes. I don't know if you've seen, for example, different books for the young learners for English, but they contain games, they contain songs, they contain different videos, they can compete, they have competition games. So this is engaging. And if you have a classroom in which you've got a projector and a computer, you can always actually use these to play them in class or project them on the wall and keep your young learners more interested. As I said, this is a great way of making greater use of visualization as well. You can share practically any kind of image or any kind of video or resource or recording or something from YouTube or a TED Talk, which can nicely fit in your lesson and increase motivation and enhance interest and student engagement. And of course, gamification, as I said, you can use different like Kahoots and Quizlets, etc. Have the competitive element. Our teachers use the Kahoots for language practice, for learning past tenses, for example, and they project on the screen actually how the game's going on and what the score for each of the teams is. And this is very, very, very involving and very engaging, and it is a variety from what we used to do in the old times being only 8 months ago. What else? By employing technology, what we learned from actually teaching in the Zoom classroom is that actually we can aim at more equal student participation. You know that this is a major issue in the face-to-face classroom, and not only the face-to-face classroom, because always there are people who dominate your classes and others who keep silent. So what we learned from the online teaching in the Zoom room is that actually we can use nomination more often and invite contributions from everybody, or we can directly call on reluctant students and invite them to say something in the lesson. Another important thing that we learned from the online classroom is that actually if we give clearly defined roles to students in the tasks and give each student a specific responsibility, this can enhance their participation. For example, if I have, let's say, a group work, one of the people can be a language monitor and monitors the accuracy of the language. One can be the rapporteur and he will report back about what the group did during the task. One of them can be the scribe and put down the ideas which they can show then to another group. So giving clear roles, giving specific responsibilities. For young learners, for example, one of them can monitor discipline and behavior. This actually enhances everybody involvement and participation. And also, it makes sense that we rethink the procedures we've got for setting homework and latecomers in the face-to-face classroom, because the online classroom made us think about these things in greater detail, actually something we took for granted in the face-to-face classroom. Sometimes in the face-to-face, we didn't acknowledge somebody coming in or telling them where we are and what we are doing. And now if they come in the Zoom room, one, you have to admit them. Two, you have to tell them what we are doing. Three, you have to put them in a breakout room if people are doing something at the moment. So as I said, this moving from face-to-face and online and then back and forth actually gives us one bigger reality of teaching, which gave us more skills, but even more things to think about and made us, I think, better teachers. Also, monitoring more effectively. So as I said, we usually in the face-to-face classroom just go around and see if people are doing the tasks or not. But in the online classroom, this was not possible. So what we started doing is actually we started putting a tally each time against the names of the students, each time a student contributed. In this way, you can actually, when you see the number of tallies against each student name, you can actually track whether they participated equally or whether some people were dominating or not. The other important thing that we learned from the online classroom is that actually we need to use clearly outlined tasks, have clear instructions, have very good examples, and have activities that make sense. Because otherwise people do not know what to do, and this is a waste of effective use of class time. The other lesson learned is that actually setting reasonable time limits is also important. If you think of the breakout rooms, in the breakout rooms, we have to set a time limit. And actually, very often it showed us as teachers that our judgment for timing is not realistic. So we need to rethink that again, even if we go back to the face-to-face classroom, because time, effective use of class time is a major priority. The other important thing that we take away for the face-to-face classroom is that when we give students a task, we need to ask them to give them a clear goal, give them a clear product to produce, and tell them what they expected to have done at the end of the activity. Be it a short text, or be it, let's say, do this gap fill activity and you expect it to make only 2 mistakes at the most. So stuff like this. So being more specific about what we expect them to achieve from the task and what product is expected is a good lesson, I think. Let me see. And addressing mistakes. So this is something which is always an issue in the face-to-face or the online classroom. And actually, we learned that we can go over learners' errors by using some online resources in the Kahoots and the Stats of Quizlet. I don't know how familiar you are with those tools, but if you go and create your accounts and play with this a bit, you'll see that they're very handy for offering feedback on mistakes and doing error correction, because they show immediately which of the sentences students got wrong and which of them are correct. So that yes, Julia?
We have actually had a whole presentation on gamification today, so I think we don't need to...
Excellent. Yeah, it's a good, actually. I'm sorry I couldn't attend the other sessions, but
okay.
It's a busy day.
Can I ask you briefly to get into a bit of nitty-gritty about hybrids? Do you do hybrids at your school?
Well, what we did actually, we are online 100% at the moment. But what we did actually was that we used Zoom to allow students to join face-to-face classes when they were quarantined.
Yeah. That's what I mean by hybrid.
Yeah. And the experience was good. In terms of students joined actually all the work in the classes and all that stuff.
Yeah, but how did you deal with the toll it takes on the teacher?
This is the problem. That's what I was going to say. In some classes, we had like 5 students from their homes and 5 students in the classroom. And teachers shared that it felt like dealing with 2 different classes at the same time. It's very, very difficult. And the other thing that I shared is that students got distracted by actually seeing their peers on the screen. But as ways out, we were saying that actually you can use the breakout rooms for the ones who work from their homes for the pair group activities, while the others work in class. But of course, it's more demanding and more stressful on the teacher.
And also, you mentioned that as a way of increasing speaking time, as homework, you ask students to record their conversations online, and then the teacher graded that. But doesn't it add to the teacher's workload that way?
But it's the same actually, even if it's the same as if you have to correct a written work, a piece of written work.
Okay.
Isn't it? Checking homework is the same.
Well, it depends. I mean, it's it's a new type of homework that maybe
I
they
know,
do
yeah, but there's short actually stretches of recordings that they don't take too long. And if the teacher just speaks and records themselves to give feedback, it's quick.
Окей. All right. Есть у кого-нибудь еще вопросы, коллеги?
Maybe here is the last thing, and I'm finishing. More opportunities for communication. So we can use student-conducted surveys, online surveys and polls, Kahoot and Quizlets, recordings, as we said, collaborative writing. Some of our teachers try to do collaborative writing via Google Docs, or forum discussions in Moodle, or video homework. You just send them a video, or get them to record themselves, make a video of themselves, send to the teacher, the very young learners. And this is to encourage speaking and writing outside the classes. So yeah, any questions?
Коллеги?
I don't know how applicable this is to your context, but I think this applies to any type of education, not only language education.
I think it was mostly applicable in March.
Yeah.
We've had all these months of doing it since then.
Yeah. And how about now in Russia? Are you doing online, or
Well,
are you doing
you
hybrid?
see, the nature of our school is such that most of our students are supposed to come to Russia in order to have their lessons.
Yeah.
And currently, most of them can't do that.
Right.
Which is why for our school, it's a very demanding situation.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, it's
As for the university, my understanding is that it depends on whether the teacher is in the risk group.
Yeah.
In terms of health, right?
Yeah. But I think all the lessons actually learned from the online teaching will apply to hybrid teaching for you, no matter where you're teaching from home or online or in the face-to-face classroom. Actually, the lesson learned is actually the loads of resources and the loads of opportunities the teaching online open can be implemented in our practice from now on. I think this is the lesson
yeah,
we've learned so far.
Of course it can be. That was not the question, but okay.
Yeah.
All right then. Thank you for your presentation.
Not at all. My pleasure to meet you.
Спасибо.
Thank you for inviting me. Спасибо вам большое.